And good evening, everybody. And before we start, I'd like to say if you'd like to comment or share this page for us, and if you have any questions for our guest this evening, please put your comments up so that he may be able to answer them. And tonight I have the pleasure of introducing you to Simon Blackler, who is going to tell us all about his awakening beyond bullying and how he came about and uses the allies of nature to help his journey of healing. Good evening, Simon.
Hi, Dawn. Hi, everyone.
How are you today?
I'm very good, thanks. I'm feeling very chipper. I'm feeling very much in the moment. I've had a terrific day out interacting with nature and taking somebody on a medicine walk, what I call a medicine walk through nature for their own personal development and healing. And yeah, I was right in my element. So I look forward to expanding a bit on that a bit later on. Once I've covered probably a bit more of my initial story.
Yeah. So how did you, I mean, like, so would you like to share with us, like, sort of your journey of bullying and how it started?
Yeah, absolutely, Dawn. Well, depending on what your particular mindset is or belief system is, you know, from my perspective, what I believe sort of happens in life is that you have a soul purpose.
Yes.
Life purpose. And that's given to you even before you enter the world. Even before that you're birthed into this generation or whatever generation that you're a part of. And I also believe that you'll be given the exact right conditions that you need to evolve beyond where you start in life. So I use the analogy of a caterpillar sort of metamorphosing into a butterfly. So a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly. And we come into the world, you know, as a caterpillar, and we learn the way of the caterpillar life before we get to some particular point in our journey where we're urged to go into chrysalis and transform ourselves into the higher being that we're meant to be, or, you know, what was, you know, conceived before our time by supernatural beings or whatever. And so that journey, however you're sort of like birthed into the world, for me in particular, I had a very troublesome birth. So when I was born, when I was inside my mother's womb or on the way out through the birth canal, I was in the breech position, and it was proving like a very troublesome delivery for my mother, and very painful, in fact. And I had an emergency cesarean section where I was sort of like lifted out of the birth canal and immediately taken away to the intensive care unit. So I didn't have any immediate connection with my mother. And then when I came back to her, unfortunately, I believe, or she believes too, in the struggles that we encountered together and me trying to get out. I had a birthmark on my forehead, which was 2 inches by an inch, something that's called a cystus nevus. So it's sort of the same color of the skin. It's not like a strawberry mark or a port wine mark. But when I came back and was reintroduced with my mother, then her immediate reaction was something like, you know, oh my God, what have I brought into the world? So there's an initial sort of like, you know, separation of this sort of like, you know, this perfect ideal of what your baby should look like. And when you're born into a family where your parents, even if they're sort of like not aware that they're doing it, and it's very it's an inadvertent process or something subconsciously that is happening, is that there is, if you're sort of like critical in nature and you don't realize that you're critical in nature, and that you tend to pick fault into others, whether it's a birthmark or the way that somebody is dressed or the way that they behave, etc., that doesn't fit the family ideal, then the person on the end of that experience is a very criticized and controlled existence. So that's just one of the ways that bullying can start in a very inadvertent way, because when you grow up, as I found myself, you may not realize that you're being conditioned in this way until you get out into the wider world. So most people's experience of bullying, I believe, starts probably in the schoolyard. And that, you know, that was the first instance where I started to experience it, or knowingly experience it, where at the age of, you know, through my infant and primary schooling, you know, was not aware of this at all. But when I got to secondary school, then what's it hit the fan, shall we say? How I say to people is that, and this is the essence of my bullying story, if you've been molded into this type of person, so very sort of like closed, insular, shy, timid guy or girl, and you don't know that you're this type of person, you will automatically attract this type of person towards you. So this is like an oppressor. This is the oppressed and the oppressor, and they go together. And this is the caterpillar way of existing, where it's sort of about conflict, it's about control, it's about power over rather than power with. And neither are happy people. So that there is a hereditary thing that's going on, or an ancestral lineage of where, you know, the oppressor before was the oppressed, and that, you know, vice versa. So there's sort of like a zigzag back through history of, like, you know, how that person that may well have been the bully in this existence, so say for example, maybe they're my parents, my father or mother, etc., they would have been bullied too themselves, either in this existence or a previous one, you know, by their parents, etc. And then you start to understand that there's this whole relationship going on that's out of balance. You know, that it's like I say, it's got this power over rather than power with, and that's our part of our journey, is to start to understand that this dynamic is in place, and to start to bring in a strategy of how we're going to counteract that. So instead of like oppressor and oppressed, we, you know, endeavor to come into a middle ground where we start to ask questions of our oppressors and bring them into a sort of a level playing field.
How did that make you feel at that age, when you realized that you were this wasn't normal relationships between your peers? Did you have any support?
Well, and to be honest with you, Dawn, and I think you've put it in the sort of like synopsis for this evening, is that I allowed this scenario to continue to happen for the first 33 years of my life. And it wasn't until I encountered or reached out to a counsellor for the first time, was I feel very lucky and benevolent on that route, because I stumbled across a gentleman that was recommended to me by the NHS at the time at my local health centre, a gentleman called Bruce, and he was able to explain to me the transactional analysis process that Dr. Eric Burns came up with, of this parent adult child scenario. So where you have the critical parent causing the criticized child, and the problem is up to that point you may understand, you know, at a level that what you're encountering is wrong or not right, and it may make you feel very unhappy, isolated, depressed, lonely, trapped, lost, not knowing where to turn. You realize that at your depth, at your very core, in your center, there is a different belief to what you're experiencing. But it's very hard to go through not only the early part of your life, but, you know, quite a deal of your life where you're looking to others to advise you. Now, you might call it naivety, or you might just call it being human. But when I came into this world and when I went to school, etc., I expected that my teachers and my elders were better placed to tell me what to do within life, how to live my life. Yeah. Because they were older people and they've been here on the planet for longer than I had been. So I looked to them for advice. But the problem was that in looking to them for advice, I was giving my power away to them, and the advice that they were giving me didn't strike a chord with me as regards what I needed to do for my life. So whether it was family or friends, if I was charting my life story and people were saying like, well, there's only this like one way to live, where you have to buckle down and you have to do this career or that career, and you have to fit in with the society that's around you, then that was their rhetoric, and it just didn't sort of like feel right for me. And you can have conversations with people where this sort of like dynamic is in place, and it's a very sort of like subtle controlling sort of like environment, but the environment of the bully and of the caterpillar can be more extreme in the fact that it does start to get abusive. So within the schoolyard in particular, and it's not really my intention to go into like too much of a story here where it's this is not about a poor me situation, this is just what I experienced. So my first bout of bullying with my peers in my tutor group eventually ended up in, so I had two fellow boys in my tutor group, one where I had an individual living across the road from me from where I lived at home, and one of the things that I've been bullied for in being different to others is having a slightly better house than other people and being deemed to be more well off, and having jokes and snidey comments aimed in my direction about being seemingly more affluent. So there was a gentleman that lived across the road from me, and he lived in a sort of terrace, state-owned type of accommodation. I'm not saying that's sort of a bad thing in any way, but his perception of me living in a privately owned detached house down the road was that I was like lord of the manor. And so back in the day when there was the series of Blackadder, I don't know if you can remember, back then there was like Lord Blackadder and his sort of servant Baldric, and they had this sort of like joke about sort of like Lord Blackadder says, "Oh, where's the nutcracker, Baldric?" And Baldric turns around to him and says, "Oh, it's his day off." So instead of this sort of like pincer thing that you would normally crack nuts with, there was an idea that you had somebody that was specially employed to be a nutcracker, and that type of goading was aimed at in my direction as regard, that's what it was like to be Simon Blackler and live in his sort of like house down the road with his parents in that sort of like Lord of the Manor type of thing, which was like from a shadow or a projection point of view way off the mark. But aligned with that person was another guy who I thought was my friend, who used to come and frequent my house and play the usual things that boys would play, like table football or whatever. And one day, however, I saw, instead of his bike being parked outside of my house, it was across the road next to my foe's house. So there was an alliance forming of like a traitorous friend or a betraying friend with somebody that had a grudge against me already. And so then started like 3 years of tyranny at my secondary school. So my secondary school, there wasn't hardly any happy days where I wasn't living without fear. And where it culminated was that my traitorous friend, he was a boxer, well, that's what he did as part of his sort of like manly development, I suppose. And I was very passive in this state of like, closed up. And I would let people do things to me. I lived with a mantra like, silence was best noise or whatever, or sticks and stones, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Absolute tosh. Absolute tosh as regards to advice. Anybody said that, names don't hurt you, they must be on a different planet, I think. So how this sort of like bullying stint culminated as came to a finish was that one day in my tutor group, this guy thought it was a fun idea because he'd learned it somewhere how to strangle somebody. So he locked his arm around my neck in a playful way to show his friend, my foe, what he needed to do to strangle somebody. And I just sat there and allowed him to do it. And so there is that sort of like word allowing. I allowed him to do it. And as he pulled it, he didn't mean to do it. He pulled his arm too tight around my neck, and I blacked out and fell to the floor. And that was the trigger for me to go and seek extra help from outside of that particular environment with the head of year.
Yeah.
So that stint of bullying came to an end. But as I said before, because you're this shape of person and you don't know you're that shape of person, and you don't know or you can't do anything to change that because you don't know that you're that person, is you're just going to meet the next bully. So turn over the page and then you're into the next bullying scenario, which did happen for me. There was another 3 years of tyranny with another gentleman in a similar sort of situation where I was the envy of him because of my status and what my father did for a profession, which I'm not necessarily going to get into now, but the poor chap, him and his family were going to be evicted from their house. And, my father in his sort of like role as an estate agent was acting for a group of landlords, and they needed somebody to blame, and I was the perfect fit. I just came into alignment, and here I am. Here's the scapegoat, or whatever you want to say. Here's the person that I need to take my vengeance out on. And that was, it was over 3 years. 3 years. I say 3 years because the last day of school, he was threatening to kill me. We had to get the police involved in all sorts of things. Because I was living with death threats every day. And it's just
frightening times.
Yeah, because you don't know whether there's any truth in it or not. And you assume the worst thing. So, if you're in that position where you don't know how to counteract that behavior and what you need to do to start to make yourself feel better in the world, then you'll just continue to accept it. I mean, basically, from the scenario that I've given you before, as this sort of like criticized child, you've got one or two options. If that's the only mode of communication that is you either accept the dynamic for what it is and absorb all of the angst from the oppressor, all of the criticism, or you know that this isn't a healthy position for you, and you rebel and become the oppressor yourself. You become the bully yourself, because that's the only way of communication that you know. And that is both what I term to be caterpillar communication. So the middle ground is the butterfly. But until you know that you've got skills available or ways of dealing with people that you can actually move into the butterfly state, you're pretty much helpless. But like I say, it took me 33 years before.
So what was the catalyst then after that 33 years that got you moving forward and wanting to change?
Well, I was in such a low place where like I hinted at before, with wherever I went to seek advice from my, where you would normally go to for advice in your immediate family or in your friendship group, the messages that were coming back to me were the same, and it didn't resonate with me. I thought there's got to be another way to live other than this. I just can't understand that I'm meant to be on this earth for this purpose of following somebody else's rule or doing jobs that, are unsatisfactory for me or don't fill me with joy or whatever it is. And I had been, I don't want to be sort of like paradoxical or a hypocrite, because there were professions that I was involved in that I did enjoy. I started on sort of like an artistic route. I was very creative, but I realized in hindsight that was part of the process in pushing me towards where I needed to be. So I'm naturally sort of like fairly right-brained, idea-focused, creative, therefore open to spirit, which I didn't realize at the time, even though I was sort of like, got a lot of my happiness from nature. I still hadn't put two and two together. So that's why I sort of like took the bull by the horns really and decided I need to see somebody outside of my immediate peer group and or family. And it feels, anybody that's approaching personal development for the first time that, hasn't perhaps read a personal development book, or, for them to go to a counselor is a big step. There was there was a lot of stigma around it at the time. It's sort of like, there still is, I think, that sort of like admitting that you might have a mental health problem or that there's something wrong that you need to go and see somebody else about, a counsellor or a coach or a therapist. So like I say, I visited this gentleman, Bruce, and he very fortunately, I sat down in front of him and I bleated on for about 20 minutes about how my life was and this was wrong and that was wrong, and I wasn't able to do this or whatever. And he just, he was brilliant. He just listened to me for that length of time. And then he was able to cut through all of my SH1T and go straight to the real nub of the matter, right to the core. And he said to me, I remember his words as if he was speaking to me today. He said, "Simon, you sound like a very intelligent guy to me, arguably more intelligent than me even." He said, "But the problem is with your life is you let other people rule it. You let every other person rule your life." And I was just there, like I am in front of you now, and I just rocked back on my chair. He just hit me with it. And I thought, bloody hell, how can you just sum up my life in just sort of like 20 minutes? You just like, knocked the ball out of the park. It's just, and I just saw my whole life go up in smoke, really, like a nuclear explosion, mushroom cloud in front of me. But that's it. How can you decipher that just like that? And the emphasis is on my own responsibility. I allowed other people, to rule my life, and arguably in the last 17 years of personal development, I've been working through that. It's still an issue, or I think it affects us all, or people that are susceptible to this, where you learn the tools or start to learn the tools, and there's the two ways of approaching it, basically. One thing, and this is what I've learned primarily from the shamanic training that I've got involved with, is that one of the things is to build up your own core strength. So you're more resilient, but also at the same time, you're doing your best to counteract the outside influence that you're experiencing. So there's ways that you can sort of like behave and act in a way where you start to challenge your bullies and your critical parents, and they don't necessarily need to be critical parents. They can be your peer group, or they may be bosses at work, or they may be even sort of like members of the opposite sex that you fancy. You don't know where you're going to sort of like come into interact with your next bully, or it may even be in a way a healthy dynamic within a relationship, because I'm sure Dawn as much as me, is that the biggest mirrors come in the relationships with people, where the veneer of the honeymoon period, if you're lucky enough to experience a honeymoon period in a relationship, when that starts to crack and the shadow of your real selves start to appear, then that's when the real sort of like juicy work starts to begin. If you're prepared to stay in it to learn about it, and sort of like and that's been another sort of like lesson in the journey, how I've seen it. Like Bruce, when I met Bruce, the counsellor, for the first time, I saw him as a butterfly. I saw him as somebody who had a different perspective on things to what I had learned up until that point. All the information that had come to me had been very caterpillar in nature, but here was a guy that was sort of like knew something different, and therefore I immediately saw him as a butterfly. Because I have, it's long in the process, but I did draft a book 10 years ago called Becoming a Butterfly, and it was about my personal development or story up until that point. And I realized the reason why it hasn't sort of like come to fruition as yet is because my journey hadn't been completed, or it wasn't to a stage where it was going to be a real benefit for other people. And I needed to go through at least another 10 years of personal development before I could get to that place. And I'm not, arguably not quite there yet, but it's in the mix. It's in the mix.
Yeah.
So, and if you'd like me to go on and talk about the other real turning point as regards where the awakening took place,
Sure.
I can quickly move into that. So,
it's all part of your journey, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm saying that at the moment I'm helping people to awaken to a life beyond bullying, to claim their true power. Now, for me, and for a great deal of other people too, and especially sort of like in the now time, when people are talking about 3-dimensional reality and 5-dimensional reality, or going from a fear-based consciousness into a more loving consciousness, is that where that love has come through for me in the butterfly state has actually, ironically enough, I realized, been with me from the outset, but I just wasn't aware of it. I did some shamanic journeying recently, and I think because I had the troubles that I did within the womb and in the birth canal, shamanic people talk about people having near-death experiences. I believe now that my near-death experience was in the birth canal, and when I went off to the intensive care unit, that was a close enough experience for me to jolt me onto the shamanic path, even though I wasn't going to discover that or start to discover that, maybe 35 to 40 years later. But
can you just give, sorry to interrupt you, can you just give, for the people listening, just a brief outline what a shamanic pathway is?
Okay. Well, so a shamanic pathway, as I understand it, and that other people will have other interpretations,
sure,
is a pathway that is very much connected to nature itself, and it stems from the indigenous people throughout the world. And it's conceivable that there was an origin of where the human species began. And because when people spread to the four corners of the earth, when you trace back into the indigenous people, they all have a similar type of belief system, which is connected to a circle, is connected to the directions of the east, south, west, and north, and what all those different qualities of east, south, west, and north, mean to different traditions. So the concepts may change. So if you want to, you pick an element for each of the directions, like in the tradition that I've learned through the shamanic training that I've come involved with, then east is very much like connected to fire, south is connected to water, west is connected to earth, and air is connected to north. Now in other traditions, those elements may change and vary.
They do in Wiccan.
Yeah.
In the Wiccan tradition, they're different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is, with shamanism, it's important not to get tied up in dogma. The dogma is not important. It's sort of like what works for you, and that's one of the biggest lessons. Basically, is not to say that, oh, we're going to have an argument now for like, I don't know, 20 minutes about the fact of whether, the air element is meant to be in the north or the east. Well, that's just like this. This is back in the sort of like three-dimensional, critical, fear-based sort of like, the way that we're going to communicate. It's sort of like, no, it's whatever works for you, and whatever is the best way for you to go forward. What is your understanding? What resonates with you? So again, getting back to the shamanic way, it's sort of like everybody has guides. So you're most likely going to have at least one animal guide, a power animal that's going to help you with your healing, but also what the indigenous people believe, or the First Nation people, is that if you go through life without knowledge of what your power animal is, then you won't really know who you are, because that animal has gifts for you. It has a way of being in the world that is reflective of your own qualities. So for instance, there's a bit of a nuance for me, a bit of a subtlety. So I've had a shift in animals recently, but they are of very similar nature. May not be when I immediately say what my power animals are or my healing animal. So I started with a black panther, and the black panther, in legend, the eyes of the black panther have almost like come from the peacock tail, or vice versa. So there is this sort of like feeling that the Black Panther can see into things deeply. Maybe, that person is prophetic. But I know from my own perspective is that when I've dealt with clients from a life coaching or shamanic healing perspective, I'm able to see into people as regards or see their truth, or be able to uncover their truth. And that, I think, comes from the far-sightedness of the Black Panther. And it also has, what I found with the animals that were introduced to my circle, is that I was learning about the shamanic path, or the way of being, before I got the actual factual teachings from my teacher, that I joined. And so when I did get the information that came to me, then it was like a tick, really, as a sort of an affirmation that actually what you've been given ahead of time has been confirmed. Because I see the healing animal that sits on the western side of the circle, and that is that's a lunar aspect. So the Black Panther is a very sort of like feminine energy for me. And part of my shamanic training, or when I first started to engage in vision quests, where you go out and sit on the land for 4 or 5 days, 3 or 4 nights, without eating anything, just drinking water, and getting information, metaphorical information, being fed back to you from nature as regards where you may well be on your life path. Which is ironic in the fact that, I've done similar work with a client of mine today, just from what I call a medicine walk perspective, where you spend like a couple of hours in nature getting that information. With a vision quest, you're spending, 4 or 5 days alone in a circle of like, it may not be any more than 12 feet in diameter, if that, just enough to put your tent in and stake out sort of like 4 directions of east, south, west, and north with various different ribbons. But the idea is that, what you're learning, or what you will learn over a period of time, is that the east, south, west, and north directions all have like deeper meaning. So from a very layman's perspective, when you learn about the wheel, you could say, like, for instance, spring is in the east, summer is in the south, autumn is in the west, and winter is in the north. Or you might associate it with, the spiritual, emotional, physical, and mental bodies. So there's like, layers upon layers of information that go on top of these circles. And what the realization is, as I muted out earlier, is that throughout the world, when you trace back or actually delve down into the indigenous teachings, it's all very similar as regards what the belief system it is, and it's all connected. It's all connected to this circular, what's known as certainly in North American or Native American sort of like tribes, or this is my belief anyway, is that it connects to the medicine wheel, what's known as the medicine wheel, which is this circle of information. So not only is there meaning behind every direction, and also what occurs on what's known as the marriage points, which is the northeast, southwest, southeast, southwest points too. There's also meanings connected to that. And so it just sort of like layer upon layer of information that takes years of study and or involvement within a community. And now we in the Western world, and particularly in the UK, we're not born into that type of environment anymore. We have got indigenous people, or have had indigenous people in the UK, and there are sort of like other teachers that I'm aware of that I've come into contact with on my journey that are more learned about this than myself, but I believe that they existed in sort of like the Isle of Mona, Anglesey, or that sort of area was one of their sort of like stomping grounds, and other places too, just where the First Nation people of the British Isles existed. So we have got that deep knowledge, but we need to journey, need to shamanic journey. So, if anybody's not familiar with shamanic journeying, that's when you take a shamanic drum and you beat it, and you take people into an altered state of consciousness, which only really means that you shut your eyes, you go into like a dreamlike state, and you journey on the rhythm of the drum. And the rhythm of the drum is sort of, well, it's a cross between two things really. It's almost like the beat of the earth, but it's also at a frequency which takes you into that altered state of consciousness. So it's possible to sort of like dream, if you like, in an awakened state. So you're conscious of what you're doing, but you're allowing yourself to, and that it depends really.
Is it meditation?
It's a bit like meditation, a bit like a guided meditation in particular. But it depends on whether you're sort of a highly visionary person, or whether you're auditory or kinesthetic, or clairsentient, or what, however the type of person that you are is probably going to determine how you're going to journey. So if you were to set up like a paranimal journey, or a journey to visit your paranimal, and you were particularly auditory, for instance, you might experience that animal through sound rather than being able to see it necessarily. If you're a highly visionary person like myself, then it might be a lot easier for you to see animals and or landscapes or environments that you travel into when you have your eyes shut and you're going on a journey with the shamanic drum. Yeah, so that's basically what I meant from engaging with the shamanic path. You have a knowledge of what this circle is about with the various different directions, and you have also an understanding that you may have or you will have a special guide, both from a perspective of like, you may have like something that sort of like is representative in the human form, possibly, or quite possibly. So lots of people have guides that are Native Americans, for instance, or it may be that your guide is, say, if you're a Christian faith, it may be Jesus or Mary Magdalene or White Buffalo Calf Woman or Muhammad or whoever it is. But you also have an animal too. So your power animal, like I said in the first instance for me, was a black panther, and that has changed of late to become a white owl. And the thing with the owl is that it has very similar, if not more acute, visionary senses. So when the owl hunts, for instance, when it flies in for its prey, and one of the characteristics of an owl is that it can see into the unseen. So one of its like real powerful qualities is that, say, if you've got a vole or a mouse running beneath the surface of the snow, then an owl will still be able to hone into where that animal exists and sees its prey without actually being able to see it. And one of the characteristics of an owl is that it has two ears, but I believe one ear goes in one direction and another ear goes in another. So their auditory, sounds that they can hear are more highly developed than a human, because our ears basically sort of like just go out, all the way forward. But because an owl's hearing's got one going forward but one going the other way, totally the other way, it's almost like they've got 360-degree hearing. And I am aware that I do hear things, or I am communicated with in ways that a lot of other people probably don't hear things, so I get whistled communications come through to me, which I believe are not tinnitus or anything of that nature. It is a direct communication with spirit or some extra,
So was it through your shamanic work that came across the allies of nature, which became your flower essences?
Yeah, well, if I just sort of like where I was with the shamanic path is that, or what I was going to talk to people about before I went on to talk about the shamanic path, was that when I was 2, I believe, it feels almost like a dream now, but there's sort of part of this story is going to be a little bit sort of like, so I was running around the story goes, I was running around the net, running around the garden with my little yellow net as a 2-year-old toddler, trying to catch butterflies. And I must have been at that moment like quite a horrible child. I don't know what was going on in my, maybe I was getting the early effects of being a criticized child, but I was seizing the cabbage white butterflies, which were seemingly delivering atrocities to the vegetable patch over the fence. And I, as the horrible kid I must have been at the time, was picking the wings off the cabbage white butterfly. And that was until such a moment that this swallowtail butterfly came from beneath the hedge and fluttered up into the garden and sort of like danced around in the sort of like flower beds for a while. And I was just captured by its imagination, or my imagination was captured by it as this lovely yellow, cyan, magenta, black creature had come to illuminate my life. And I believe now that was my first shamanic experience, because 30 odd years later, and where I'm going to join the story up now is that after I left my counsellor, Bruce, within 2 or 3 years, I was introduced to a coach by the name of Neil Crofts. And he'd written a book called Authentic, How to Make a Living by Being Yourself. And I won't go into the story of how I got to meet him, but I was drawn to his work, and so I was drawn to his work by a person that I'd met in my networking group up to that point. So I am going to go into that story a little bit, I think. I've been a graphic designer, so I'd followed that sort of like creative line through, being a textile designer and a graphic designer, but not feeling that I was like still doing my true vocation. And I happened to have 2 or 3 things happen in quick succession as a real sort of like turning point in my life. And the culmination of that was me, unfortunately, having a car crash. Although it wasn't a severe car crash, it was still enough to shake me up as regards this one particular day. I was journeying with my friends. They were going in separate cars to go surfing down in Newquay, and we were on our way down there, and unfortunately we encountered a road traffic accident on the main A38, and we had to find alternative routes, and I was negotiating my way tentatively through the back lanes of Liskeard, and I unfortunately met a farm boy going Mach 3 with his hair on fire, not expecting to see other people tootling along his normally, trouble-free lanes. And he just hurtled into me. He just couldn't stop in time. And that sort of like diagonal force that went through the car, even though I'd sort of like released the handbrake on my own car because I knew what was going to happen. The car was a write-off. My car was a write-off, and I had whiplash for 2 years. But like I say, it wasn't a severe one. It wasn't where I was sort of like in hospital for weeks, and I'm not grumbling at all about my situation, really. It was just a real wake-up call as regards, what are you doing with your life? As much as you try and wrap yourself up in cotton wool, etc., you can't counteract what the universe may well have in store for you. And it was enough to make me think, well, is my graphic design career rewarding enough for me? And I felt, well, no, it wasn't, because I was still encountering bullies in the way that I was being paid, etc., or the jobs that I was doing for people. And this lady in my network, when I reached out to people and saying, I'm not feeling fulfilled, or I don't know how quiet I put it, but I was steered in the way of Neil Crofts, and I attended a transformation day that he ran up in Gloucestershire at the Matara Centre. And one of his exercises that he did, and it's the exact same exercise I've done today with my own client, is that he took me out into nature. He took all of us out into nature, and we had to chart our life, basically, the various sort of like zones within the gardens that we were experiencing. So like past, present, future, and destiny spaces, in order to enable us to understand, if that is the right word that I would use, what our true nature was about, or what our life purpose was about. And the thing is, with that type of work, I seem to be spinning. What happens with that type of work is that the left brain can't compute all the information that it's been delivered from nature, because you're feeding in information metaphorically all the time. And from my own experience, under pressure, this sort of like bolt from the blue came from my right brain, more creative brain. And a voice came in my head and said, Simon, you're to be a spiritual guide. And it was another one of those sort of like, you know, back in the seat moments where I'd been totally knocked off center. And I thought, flipping heck, how am I going to possibly embed that in my life? You know, that's just not me for six. And the way I chose to approach it in the immediate future from that moment in 2006 was that it was an initial call to help people connect with their inner spirit. And therefore, life coaching was the route for me, in the way that Neil Crofts was a life coach too. So that's the way that I chose to approach it. But within a couple of months, I was doing another course with Neil. He'd set another advanced transformation course out in Mallorca. And this was designed to basically train you to be a facilitator to take his mode of coaching forward. And I went for this course, but I realized when I got there to Mallorca, the foothills of the Tramontana range, in the sort of like lesser traveled areas of Mallorca, that the reason I went there was not for the course itself. It was actually to experience the finca, the little farmhouse that I was staying in next door on the day prior to the course, because I got there and I arrived and I put my bags down and I was aware of this like real oasis, this couple called Sheila and Ridian. They had a borehole that went right down through the rock, down through the Mediterranean Sea into the rock below, and tapped into a freshwater source that ran from the Pyrenees. And then they pumped up this water into their own garden, and it was like an oasis of green, you know, in amongst all this arid sort of like, you know, area around. And it was just an abundance of wildlife. And in amongst the shrubbery was this yellow butterfly that started bobbing its way towards me. And that was me coming back into contact with the swallowtail again. And when I saw it, all this energy started to awaken from the base of my spine, you know, up through my spine and in my head. And I thought, wow, what's this? What is happening to me? What is this energy all about? And then as more people came to join the course, there was a young lady called Hazel, and she joined, and she joined me around the swimming pool. And she said, Simon, I don't get all this religious thing, this sort of like, you know, and what spirituality is all about. And I don't like organized religion, etc. She said, what's your take on spirituality? I said something along the lines of like it being a very simple thing as far as I was concerned, that once you start to connect with what your life purpose or what your soul purpose is about, it's delivering your gifts for the greater good. And in that recognition of that, I think it's called something like karma yoga or something. I did have the expression before, but it's sort of, again, in that expression, that same energy came from the base of my spine, almost like in an affirmation of coming up right up through me, what I understand now to be like Kundalini energy.
Yeah.
So I wasn't a great sort of like, you know, meditative person at the time, but I chose to meditate on my two experiences that I'd experienced that night in bed. And I was lying there sort of like, you know, above the covers, and suddenly these sort of like, you know, waves of energy started to percolate up from my being. And I can only understand that now as experiencing what I believe was a full body orgasm, because I was in a heightened state of awareness and oneness. And I've only experienced that once since, and that was like 15 years ago. So, well, that instance that I'm talking about was 15 years ago, and then when did I experience the last? Then I had another instance in this country, close to where I had been doing some of my shamanic training, but at a different time altogether, in a place called Compton Dundon, near Glastonbury, where there's a yew tree there that's sort of like 2,000 years old. And I'd spent some time with the yew tree in the afternoon, and I went to bed at night. My girlfriend was with me at the time, and again, I started to get waves of energy coming to me, and another realization of what it is to be Simon Blackler, basically on this planet. But what I've found in my shamanic journeying and with the training that I engaged in was that my medicine name is Swallowtail. So that those instances where I've had the connection at the age of 2, at the age of 36, and then I have to, so at the age of 47 are the elements where I've had connections with Swallowtail, and the last one wasn't a butterfly, etc. It was a number of swallows all flying into my Vision Quest space in Pistol Reader in Wales. So that was the realization that my medicine name was Swallowtail. And also what came through the shamanic training and spending a lot of time in nature is that one of the key aspects, the module that most resonated with me was when I started to work with plants. And throughout all of the Vision Quests that I'd been on, I had noticed it, but I hadn't realized the significance of it, that there was always a particular flower that was stood out around my circle. And for the first few, it was the foxglove. So the foxglove was sort of like standing guard as a protector for the space that I was in. That was how I interpreted it at the time. And then when I came to create flower essences or learning about flower essences, because basically I inquired as to regards whether I understood that there was going to be like whole modules, or could be whole modules, on flower teachings within shamanism, but it didn't seem as if it was on the agenda for the Northern Drum School that I'd come basically to learn with. And so I heard from another student on the course that he'd engaged with the Chalice Well, the accredited Chalice Well Flower Essence course in Glastonbury. And it was like as if I was being prompted in that direction because of the information that I got on Vision Quests, basically pointing me in the direction of flowers. And sort of the foxglove, what I've come to know about the foxglove is that it is a guardian of the threshold. So it's sort of like there to support you in your transition from one realm to another. So if I was transversing into a realm of where the flowers are, then it's almost like, a plant standing on sentry duty, or, that's going to help you with the threshold into that sort of realm. And another connection with the foxglove is that it's very, if you look at the shape of a foxglove, it's very sort of like spinal in its quality, with all of its sort of like different flowers that look like different vertebrae all the way up the flower. And this, tying into the previous conversation, can tie into Kundalini energy, because Kundalini energy works from the base of the spine, and also Kundalini energy, once you are able to engage with it, whether that comes in a very fortuitous, benevolent way, or whether you have to work years on it, with Kundalini yoga, etc., then again, it is a guardian to the threshold. Once you are able to connect with the Kundalini, then it is a barometer for you. You know, I'm very fortunate myself that when I'm able to connect with it, and I can't, you know, instantly ignite it, you know, I've had it a little bit here, but if I'm in conversation with somebody like yourself, or a client of mine, or even somebody that wants to give me a bit of inspiration or whatever, or some learning for me, then that energy comes in an affirmation, as in sort of like, yep, you're absolutely on point, you're in the right place, you're doing the right thing, you know, this is the information that either you need to share or you need to be given, you know, pay attention,
Yeah.
here it is. So that was the foxglove. And yeah, so then as soon as I engaged with the chalice well flower essences, that was like a romantic journey then, because I took to flower essence producing and making and creating like a duck to water. So it's pretty much within a week or two. It's been 2 years now since I started the chalice well flower essence practitioner course. You know, spending the first 12 months getting the accreditation, but also I took, you know, I was so inspired by it, so enthused by it, that I started making flower essences from the get-go, you know,
Oh, wow.
pretty much as the first module
Yeah.
finished. I was so keen, and my, you know, teacher at the time, Natasha Wardle, saw my enthusiasm and, you know, basically embraced that and started, you know, giving me bottles, etc., to take away with me and experiment with. So, yeah, in the first week of April 2019, and this is my sort of like opportune moment to bring it in, then the blackthorn, as it is now, was very abundant within all the hedgerows. And
Yeah.
it was like it was calling me, it was seemingly calling me, not calling, but shouting at me to take an essence from it. Well, that's what I felt. And the essence of the blackthorn, as far as I'm aware, or what's been conveyed to me in the messaging, is that it's a flower that appears in the hedgerow in an otherwise barren hedge. So it's like, you know, the first flower of the hedge or the roadside that you see in the springtime, and therefore it's a pioneer, and it ultimately shows us direction and tells us about, you know, how to know the way. So it's a plant that's about sort of like knowing the way. And what I've come to realize in the course of a 2-year journey is that my flower essence and the flowers in particular are here to help support people in that journey of awakening to a life beyond bullying, to help claim their true power. I believe that all of my essences, with each one, you know, so the quality with a blackthorn is direction. You know, if you are bullied, then you feel lost. You know,
Yeah.
you haven't got an internal guidance system, or if you have, it lies deep within you and needs to be extracted or encouraged out, because, you know, your own truth is so deep within you. You've covered it up with any amount of shell on top of
Yeah.
it, or layers of, you know, you in self-protection mode. You've
Yeah.
gone
Yeah.
you've gone small, and you know, that shell needs to be broken, or, you know, that kernel of truth needs to be helped out into the light, basically. So, you know, from that sort of like lost perspective, and also, so that's the blackthorn is very much here and now, and it's, you know, people can see it out in the hedgerow at this moment in time, and I see that sort of as a March essence, but a late March essence, even though I collected it in early April. And then that goes on to the next essence, which is the bluebell. And the bluebell was always going to be, as soon as I started on this track, it was always going to be an essence in my range, because I just love bluebells. every year I've loved bluebells, but I'm beginning to understand the real reason behind that, or at least I think I am, in the fact that the quality of the bluebell, that this particular essence that I've got here, its quality is beauty. And again, from a bullying perspective, as I said early on in this sort of almost an hour ago now when we started this conversation, is that innocence that we have of being born into this world and then being presented to our mother and inadvertently not having our beauty being recognized. It's lost at that point, where it can be conceived that it's lost, that you lose that feeling that you're loved, or that you're not being recognized or accepted for the person that you are. Your beauty is not being seen. And the bluebell, when it graces our woodlands and hedgerows, etc., and you witness it within a glade, within a woodland scene, it's very bashful, I would say. It's got an understated beauty with the shape of the stem, etc. It's got a curvature, so it droops its head over. It's very elegant. It's very innocent. And the way I work with spirit is that I'm being a creative. I'm a bit of a wordsmith. So what was presented to me into the woodland, or in the woodland scene of me collecting the bluebell essence, that yes, it's innocent, but when you connect with it, you gain an inner sense. So there's that very similar sort of like wording of innocent and inner sense. And that's what really was being described to me as regards what the bluebell is about. It puts you in touch with what the inner sense of you is all about, what your inner beauty is all about, and encourages that beauty to come out of you, or to allow you to start to shine. And what the flowers have done, as great teachers they are, I've found, in which I don't know how much longer we've got or how much time that we could spend talking tonight, but I found in my journey with the flowers is that with the blackthorn, it's presented itself to me at a certain time in the year. So like March, April. Then the next flower was the bluebell, which was solid April. And then the next flower was the red campion, and that was May. So the flowers started to show me when they appeared within the year, or when what I was drawn to. So part of it was passion as regards what particular flowers I was passionate about. Like I go through a number of months and I'm thinking, I really want that flower in my range, and I've not included it yet. And it's like the meadow sweet, and it started coming out in June, and now we're sort of like September. I must take it. I must collect an essence of this meadow sweet in September, even though it's right at the end of the season. And then I started to realize why I, had to collect it in September rather than June, because it's about balance, or I believe it's about balance. So they used to put the meadow sweet on the floors of churches in bygone eras to take away the mustiness, the mouldy smell of the churches, to bring balance to it, basically. And then the more I inquired into it in the moment of collecting the essence and what was going on in the ether at the time, I'd found that flowers have been my biggest communicators. I started the shamanic path with connection with animals, but flowers, I'm sitting with flowers because they don't move, do they? The same would be the case with trees, is that the period of like a half an hour or so when you're collecting an essence, then you're being communicated to as regards what that essence is about, whether it is the time of the year that it appears, or where it's growing, whether it's in the hedgerow or the woodland or on a boundary, how it's growing in relationship to the next flower in the range. So the bluebells and the red campions are often seen together, and the bluebells come out arguably first, or are more abundant initially, and then more of the red campions come on, and they sort of like more or less take over the hedgerow where the bluebell moves off. And there's something in the essence of that as regards the community of the Red Campions. Yeah, and so I was being shown, and then when you talk about essences, you don't have to select particular dates, but I found that I was being guided to the moon cycles. So, for instance, I took the blackthorn as a flower essence was created on a new moon. And because of the sort of like time span of like, you know, how I initially created it in the first week of April, and I wanted to create another April essence or a proper April essence in Bluebell, then the natural sort of like time span of that was about 3 weeks. And I found myself wanting to collect an essence every 3 weeks initially. So, and the flower divas are quite sneaky, I think, when they get together. The flower diva, for anybody that doesn't know what a diva is, and it's DEVA, is the sort of like overall spirit of the flower. So like the bluebell would have like a diva, and that would be different to a red campion diva. But it's a spirit or a sprite or elf or whatever sort of like, mystical type of being that you associate with, really. But they can be quite cunning, really, in the fact that they might disguise the teaching that you have to learn over a period of time. So, I could have gone out and created a range of flower essences, which were all full moon essences, but that's not what they've directed me to do. So the first one, like I said, was a new moon. The bluebell was a waning half moon essence, and then I might be then I was presented with a full moon essence, and then it was a waxing half moon. So it was in that sequence, and then I realized, oh, that's a sequence, and then what do I do if I repeat that sequence? So I was being encouraged to collect essences connected to the moon cycles, but in a mismatch in a different order. But what I found towards the end of creating the range, or what intuitively came to me, was the thought, though, of what would happen if I put the 3 new moon essences together. So that's when I started to create the blends. So this is a new moon blend, which contains the 3 new moon essences from the Allies of Nature range of flower essences. So that is the blackthorn and the oxeye daisy and the dandelion. And when I investigated it a bit further, I realized that because I've been presented in the information in the order that I had, that I hadn't realized that they are of a similar type of the language, or there is a story, there is another quality that can come forward from the new moon blend. So if the blackthorn is about direction and knowing the way, then the oxeye daisy is very much about vision and approaching life with bright eyes. And like I said, there's a story behind each of these essences, where I could be here literally all night with you, Dawn. And I'm doing quite well at the moment.
We are. We've gone well past the hour.
and then there's the dandelion, which is all about trust and keeping the faith. So you're basically connecting into something that's given you direction, something that's given you vision.
Yeah.
And something that's allowing you to keep the faith. And when you start to put that combination together, then you have an assurance. The overall quality of those 3, and knowing your purpose. So you know your purpose because you have a clear direction. You can see where you're going, and you're trusting in that process of you know, having a vision with direction, and
Yeah.
that's going to take you to where you need to go. So there are individual flower essences that are, you know, like the red campion,
Yeah.
which is about connection and what it is to be yourself within community, which hints at what your life purpose is about. So that in that way they are sort of like related. But what I've found in my journey with the flower essences is that I've now got 18 flower essences in total, and 6 of these sort of like lunar or solar blends, and they go together into like 24 essences in total.
Wow.
So anybody that chooses to go on a journey with me of personal development opens themselves up to the possibility of gaining support from the flowers and the essences by getting, you know, if you engage in a personal development program with me, possibility of 2 flower essences per month, complementary within that package, in order to support you in your progression to awaken to a life beyond bullying, to claim your true power. And that's it in a nutshell. So the flower essences come into alignment with the shamanic healing
Yeah.
and practice that I've learned, and the life coaching from before, which is all designed to help people that are similar to me, that have encountered bullying or controlling or critical conditioned lives, and want to evolve beyond that. And that can be purely from a state of going from a fear-based consciousness to a more loving one, from the 3D to the 5D, depending on what your language is that you are more familiar with using. But I would.
So how can people get hold of you, Simon?
Well, the main way of seeing what I do and what my offer is to connect with me through my Allies of Nature website, which is www.alliesofnature.co.uk, and it's got all of my essences on there and my shop on there, and sort of my offer. But I'm also available on Facebook, both under my own name as, you know, Simon Blackler, or I have a Allies of Nature page, and I have a Allies of Nature community group, which is all designed. And the reason behind that was to set up what I'm calling like a butterfly society, so people that are prepared to evolve beyond this sort of like caterpillar mindset into finding a, you know, a community of the future, which is more loving in nature rather than fear-based. Because you could argue, and I haven't got into it, and possibly not a good idea to get involved in it there, but the caterpillar culture that I'm aware of, I believe, because the caterpillar is basically about growth, it taps into the growth model that we experience, the majority of us experience throughout the world still. Whether, you know, what we've been going through recently is the Great Reset or whatever, we shall wait and see. But, you know, there may well be an opportunity now that's presenting itself to become more butterfly-like in nature. If enough people are sort of awakening to that aspect, and like I've said in my spiel tonight, you've got those 2 things going on. Everybody's got those 2 things going on, of releasing the fear-based caterpillar 3D culture to embrace the more loving 5D butterfly type society. So that's why I set up Allies of Nature community, and my subgroup, or, you know, you can also access it individually, is the Awakening Beyond Bullying group, because I'm aware that when I set up my initial Allies of Nature community, it was very much on the premise of creating a more sustainable type environment to live in, whereas my story, as you've hopefully heard tonight, is very much about overcoming the effects of bullying to find your true identity. And I've set up this other group so that people can specifically engage with me on a bullying basis, or if you've experienced, like I said, criticized, controlled, conditioned living a life that you don't want to live, and you aspire for something better, then that's the group to be a part of and engage with me through. And then I have similar Instagram accounts, and I also have a YouTube channel now. So like yourself, have a YouTube channel.
Well, if you send me the link to all your things, I'll put them in the comments below this video, and I'll also add them to when I transfer this one over to my YouTube channel. I'll put all your information and contact details below, if you like.
That's brilliant, Dawn. I mean, I hope what I've spoken about this evening has been of interest to people, and that you know, if they've experienced sort of like bullying in their own lives, that, you know, you're not alone. There are other people like myself and others out there that can support you and resonate with you and assist you, and or, you know, direct you to other therapists that, you know, may be of value to you. If I, or, you know, we can't solve the particular problem that you're dealing with. But my invitation to people is to get in touch and let's have a chat. You know,
yeah, sure.
If this subject matter is something that you resonate with, or you want to connect more with nature and using, you know, the allies of nature, either the animals through the shamanic path or the flowers through the flower essences, that's my invitation to you.
Thank you. And with that, I'd say really thank you. It's been a really interesting talk, Simon, and all about your journey. And thank you so much for sharing it, openly sharing it with us all this evening. And I wish you all the luck with your new venture, with your essences and your new journey and work. And may you continue to grow as you are.
Thank you very much. And I would say to everybody, you know, encourage people to be, if they dare, to be more vulnerable, because the more vulnerable that you're prepared to be and open, the more people will resonate with you. And this is the journey that we're all on, I think, in order to engage people in our work, is to be more open with who we are as individual people. And that basically helps the transformation within, from the caterpillar to the butterfly. You know, you have to acknowledge what you've gone through in order to be able to help other people, you know, in a similar vein. So I thank you, Dawn, in particular, for inviting me onto this platform this evening, and
you're welcome.
Been a delight, an absolute joy, and thank you very much for allowing me the space to be able to speak into, which I've actually found very easy to do, which I love this type of interview format. Yeah,
good.
Thank
you
so much.
You're welcome.
To yourself.
And I'll say good night to everybody else. Good night.
Good night, everyone.